If you have notes, once again, reread them. If you don't have notes, reread the magazines bit at least at this point in time and do that multiple times. Why? You should not focus too much on recollection. It is always, because this exam is competitive, your scores are relative. It's not that they have given you an absolute cutoff that you have to breach. You have to just do better than your competition. I would continue to tell you the same thing, right? Right now is not the time to drop off. Right now is the time to have belief in your work ethic. Do not procrastinate right now. Have faith in yourself. You are going to clear it. Don't worry.
Hello dear aspirants. Welcome to Vision IAS special series of discussion on UPSC Prelims preparation 2024. So with less than 30 days remaining, we enter the most crucial phase of preparation. So to discuss on this and to share his valuable tips and insights on how to address these challenges in the last lap of preparation, I am joined by Mr. Ranchan sir, who is an esteemed faculty for CSAT at Vision IAS. So sir, a very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you for having me, Ramakant.
So sir, to begin with, as we enter the most crucial phase of the preparation, and you must be interacting with numerous students on a daily basis. So what is worrying the students more at this point of time?
That's a very valid question, Ramakant. I get a lot of queries from students around, especially around this point in time when there is about less than half a month. It's closer to a month remaining till your D-Day. Right? The most common queries that I get typically revolve around, first would be around comprehensiveness of their preparation, whether they have prepared comprehensively or not, whether what they feel is good enough in terms of their preparation, is that good enough for them to crack the exam or not, that is one. Second would be in terms of finding out ways to revise effectively. Third would be, because around this point in time, a lot of students take a lot of tests. So some of them are a little too worried about how much of an indicator a test score is of their real chances of clearing this exam or not. These are the general queries that I get around this point in time. Now, continuing with these queries, some people continue to keep themselves steady and some people start to develop confidence issues around this point in time. It's only those who keep themselves steady, they are going to see themselves through.
So as you've highlighted numerous challenges that the student is facing at this point of time, so what would be some of the suggestions or solutions to addressing these challenges, especially the anxiety or the confidence issues that the students are facing at this point?
I would like to emphasize here that it's not something which is unique to any aspirant. It's a problem that almost everyone faces, closer to the time of the examination. It's partly because of the nature of the exam itself. It's also because of the syllabus, because the syllabus is quite open-ended and they can ask you questions from anything under the sun. That is one. Another would be in terms of consolidating your sources at this point in time, which is anyways a challenge. This is not unique to any aspirant per se. Everybody faces this, right? So to know that for a fact typically helps some persons, some people, but some people may not, be able to alleviate themselves of this fear. Just because everybody else faces it does not help them relieve themselves of this anxiety per se. Right? What I would typically recommend around this point in time is for students to trust their work ethic and to trust their process. Whatever they have covered up until now, they should believe that this is good enough for them to clear this exam. Why? Because prelims primarily is about the skill of eliminating. It's about picking out the right answer from a set of 4 options which are presented to you. Right? It's about that skill primarily, and that skill is something that you learn by experience, something that you learn by doing, by taking more tests, by consolidating your sources first, rereading them, revising them, evaluating yourself in the face of various tests, and then working on what your areas of weakness are, what your areas of strength are, identifying them, working upon them. It's basically the same routine that is to be followed by every aspirant. It's not special for any other aspirant, I would say.
Sir, you talked about revision. So how does, considering the syllabus is huge and quite open-ended as you had highlighted, so how does one, is there a strategy, how does one approach to cover the syllabus at this point of time, and how do you balance both GS as well as current affairs?
One thing is we are very, very close to the examination. That is something that everybody must recognize and must acknowledge. Right now, up until now, what you have covered in terms of the static portions of it, the 4 core subjects, which is polity, geography, economics, and also history, you stay with it, right? Apart from that, you have to have done at least a basic analysis of previous year's question papers and seen the kind of questions that they typically ask you. Some of these questions in prelims are very fundamental, they are concept-based questions, and some of these questions are issue-based questions, which are primarily revolving around current events. May not be, very recent, but it could be, let's say, about 15 months back in time. Right? That is something that everybody needs to acknowledge first, and everybody needs to know this. Right? As regarding the core aspects of it, whatever you have studied up until now, if you have made your short notes, only focus on rereading those short notes. And an effective way of revising would be to take tests around them. When it comes to current affairs, I'm guessing most students would have their current affairs notes also ready by this point in time. They would have either relied on a newspaper, or they may have relied on a newspaper and a magazine combination, whichever that is. Right? If you have notes, once again, reread them. If you don't have notes, reread the magazines bit at least at this point in time, and do that multiple times. Why? You should not focus too much on recollection, as you should focus on the frequency of rereading the same thing again and again, because typically in an exam situation, the environment is such that you will, by one means or the other, come down to the real answer. That's the beauty of this examination per se, I would recommend. Right? So my focus would be on essentially on using your time up to reread, to revise, and one effective way of revising would be to take tests around this point in time. However, you have to be mindful that you cannot take too many tests also, because it's not just the act of test taking which is important. More important than that is analyzing your tests and your score in general. That is what I would recommend.
So that is very beautifully summarized, the revision strategy for covering both current affairs as well as the static portion. So one important element that you talked in the end of your answer was the mock tests and how to analyze them. And many students are always confused about, how to go about analyzing this mock tests. Sir, any advice on how to go about this?
Yes, certainly. What I feel is most students are concerned with their test scores. Because their test scores are not very steady, they tend to become a little too fearful of the odds. Right? They start to feel whether they were performing better previously and now the scores have dipped, or they were performing, their scores typically lie in the same range, it's not really increasing so much. That is what they are worried about the most. I would like to point out that it's not really the score that is going to be very, very important. Of course, it's important, but scores typically are not meant to be steady. Why? Because they're a function of how well prepared you are, how well you know how to navigate an objective type exam. Another would be in terms of understanding how to really go about an objective type paper in the examination hall per se. Right? It's also about the level of difficulty. So your scores are not meant to be steady in any case. Right? What you have to basically focus on is every time you give a test, the test has to be taken in a very time-bound manner, right? Which is exactly how it happens. Right? Once you are done with the test, once the results are out, first focus on those questions that you got right. Ordinarily, this is something that most aspirants skip. Right? They presume that whatever their logic was or whatever their information was, that was the reason why they got that question right. It may not always be the case, especially in questions, let's say, based on applied economics, or also even in polity for that matter, constitution-based questions. Right? Sometimes it is that you apply the wrong formula and get the right answer. Right? So you have to make sure that whatever your logic was, that is the main reason behind that answer being correct or not. That's one. That is going to take you the least amount of time. Then focus on those questions where you got the answers wrong. Now, there can be two reasons why you got that answer wrong. It could be because it's a question which is primarily based on information and you were not acquainted with that information. You applied some sense of logic, right, to the options and eliminated, and based on, let's say, faith or luck, or you relied on luck and you just marked an option and that was wrong. Right? Just validate whether your logic was wrong, or is it wrong because you did not know a critical piece of information. Right? That is also one way of coming across new bits of information. Right? It's also one way of telling yourself that I now know things more, or I now know things better. If it's about logic, right, and your logic was invalidated, I typically feel that this is some sense, in some sense, it affects your ego. So, which is also the reason why you would remember it for much longer. Right? So next time if you're getting a similar question, the same question or a similar question, chances are you're not going to mark that wrong. Right? So you should not be afraid of getting questions wrong. That's completely normal. People do get questions wrong. It's just that you have to analyze as to why you got that question wrong. Right? Now there will be some questions where you just attempted them just for the sake of doing it. They are called blinders per se. Right? Focus only on the information around them. Read the explanation well enough. right? I wouldn't recommend trying to memorize that information. Only think of why that options or certain few options are wrong or why those options are right. That's about it. Right? The more the number of tests you take, the more number of questions you get acquainted with, that typically helps you better in the examination hall also, I would say.
Sir, coming to the next question that students have in their mind is that, how many questions should we attempt and how do we arrive at this number? So is there an approach to, arrive at this number?
This is one of these questions that I get asked the most, and typically I get asked this question by people who have not taken this exam previously, even also by some people who have taken this exam not successfully though, maybe 1 or 2 attempts. They ask me this question quite a lot of times, and I have only one answer to this, that I really don't know. Right? There is no one number that you can pinpoint and say, this is the number of questions that you should attempt. Right? It is always, because this exam is competitive, your scores are relative. It's not that they have given you an absolute cutoff that you have to breach. You have to just do better than your competition. Right? So you need to understand what the level of difficulty of this question paper is. How do you get to finding that out? If you have seen previous year's question papers. Right? If you have seen previous year's question papers and also tallied what the cutoff for each respective year was, you would notice a certain trend. You would notice that if there are questions which are directly coming in from current affairs, typically the cutoffs will be higher. If there are questions which are coming from core areas but not from your standard books, ordinarily the cutoff will be lower. So getting a hang of that is very, very important. Right? Why? Because it helps you, at least in the examination hall, place in your mind what the reasonable cutoff for that exam would be. Right? Now, if you have some reasonable cutoff, for instance, if your paper was largely similar to last year's paper, and if the last year's cutoff was, let's say, somewhere around 75 odd, you can expect the cutoff to be, around 80, 85 this year. Why? Because aspirants have seen that kind of question paper at least once previously. Right? So they will be better prepared for those questions. Now, it's about finding a safe score. Right? I would recommend whatever you think the cutoff is, add 10 to 15 to that. That should be your safe score. Right? And then go about calibrating the number of questions that you are attempting. First, go for those questions where you at least know what the answer is, where you are reasonably sure what the answer is. Count the number of questions down. Find out how many, what's your best case scenario. Right? How close you are to your, whatever you have thought of is a safe score. Right? If you think there are more questions that need to be attempted, then go for second type of questions where you can at least eliminate 2 options. Right? Now, in those questions, there is a reasonable chance that you may get half of them right, half of them wrong, or, probabilities can work whichever way. Right? And then find out, what is your best case scenario? Are you very close to the cutoff or not? Then calibrate and go for those questions where you can eliminate only one option. Right? Then there are last few set of questions for which you either don't know what has been asked in the question or you do not know anything about what has been mentioned in these statements. These are what I call blinders. Whether you want to attempt them or not is primarily a function of how close you are to what you think would be a safe score for you to clear that exam or not. And that really depends upon the D-Day. Right? It's more tactical than it's strategic. Right? It has to be decided on the very day itself, in the examination hall itself. Right? Always a function of what kind of question paper that is. Right? There is no set number to it, I would recommend. But yes, I would definitely recommend you to attempt more questions, because chances are that it's going to land you in positives, net positives, not net negatives. And that is something that I usually, you can say, recommend to aspirants.
So that was very comprehensively addressed. I'm sure that will benefit the students. So one should not go with a predetermined mindset, and one should decide on the question paper and on the exam day.
One should be clear on principally as to how many questions should one attempt. It's a function of what kind of a question paper that is. Yes, the more the number of questions you attempt, chances are that you're going to land in the positives only, right? So your aim should be to maximize the number of questions that you should be attempting. However, there is no person that can really put a number or put a finger on a certain number and tell you, you should attempt only 80, 85. Nobody can say that.
True, sir. So now moving on to subject-specific strategies. So considering that you must be, encountering a lot of queries about CSAT. So at this point of time, as we have seen in the last few years, the CSAT has become a nightmare, and CSAT also has become increasingly difficult for many candidates. Yes. So how do we deal with such a situation, especially CSAT, in the last 30 days of the preparation?
It's quite funny because till about 5 years back, nobody was really bothered with CSAT. But what UPSC has done to the nature of this exam, to the level of difficulty of CSAT, it has definitely become one of the biggest stumbling blocks. In fact, I would also put it as one of the reasons as to why the cutoff last year was, about 75, which is dangerously close to the cutoff for CSAT, right? If you ask me about CSAT or the right way to go about it, I would first divide the kind of aspirants into two buckets. One will be aspirants who are good at aptitude naturally and have also trained themselves. Right? These are typically engineering students or students from a mathematical or a hard science background who have had a previous experience with quantitative aptitude or logical reasoning based questions per se. That is one category. Right? So long as you have these kinds of, you can say, aspirants who have a background plus who have also trained themselves, they know how to navigate these exams. Right? They would know that closer to the time of prelims, with about 30 days remaining, one full-length test per week should do. Right? The next category of aspirants are aspirants who either do not have had a background or may have lost touch with quantitative aptitude or logical reasoning quite a while back, but they're preparing for it. Right? Now, these, I believe, form the biggest chunk of aspirants closer to the time of prelims primarily. Now, these people, the most common issue that they face is issues around confidence. Right? They are once again worried too much about, whether their preparation is comprehensive or not, the kind of scores that they are getting. Right? They are too worried about all of that. What I would say is, in terms of comprehensiveness, in terms of this, what we call the fear of missing out, you don't have to be too worried here. Right? There is only a finite number of permutations and combinations when it comes to the kind of questions that they may ask you in CSAT. Although the number is finite, but it's huge enough for you to take months, right, if not years, to completely, have done each question at least once and then redone it. Like, it'll take you some more time too. Because you are very close to this examination, now is not the time to think about comprehensiveness of your preparation. Now is the time to really prioritize, right? So look at any year previous year's question papers, the set of previous year's question papers. I would recommend 2013 onwards is good enough. Right? A time span of 10 years is more than good enough. Right? Find out which are the most common areas from which UPSC asks questions. Right? Then classify those areas based on your areas of strength. Some you could say topics would be certain topics where you are very comfortable. Some topics will be where you're not as comfortable, but you know that you can prepare for it and get better. And then there will be some, you can say, topics where you are a little unsure. Right? Now, basis how many questions are asked previously, that's how you have to allocate time. Allocate more time to questions which are more likely to be asked. For instance, in quantitative aptitude, you cannot really do away without preparing for number systems per se, right? Time, speed, and distance, time and work, ratios and proportions, averages and allegations, right? Geometry is not asked generally speaking. So you need to know that these are the kind of topics which are frequently asked. In logical reasoning also, you need to know there are certain few topics. For instance, arrangements typically take you a little longer. Right? Then there are questions which they ask you on dices and cubes, and there are questions that they may ask you, let's say, on clocks for that matter, calendars for that matter. Right. Identify the topics which are asked the most frequently. Amongst these topics, prioritize on the basis of which topics are topics of your choice or where you are very comfortable, right? And then find out those topics where you're not as comfortable, but you have a belief that you can get better at it by trying more. And then also identify those topics where you're not very sure. Typically in quantitative aptitude, these are topics around probability and permutations and combinations. Now, basis your own assessment of yourself, right? For those topics where you find yourself to be comfortable, try to put yourself in difficult situations, right? Which is where the Sandhan test series is going to help you so much more, right? Try to attempt those questions which generally are a little more difficult, right? Try to challenge yourself. For those topics where you find that you're a little unsure, but you can get better, practice so much more, right? And for those topics where you're unsure, at least attempt the more basic kind of questions. Because if the basic kind of questions come in the exam, it's your fault that you got them wrong, right? So that is one way of going about it, right? I would not recommend taking too many tests around this point in time. I would recommend rather revisiting those kind of questions as you would have done over the course of time in terms of your preparation and redoing the same questions again so that it becomes muscle memory of sorts, right? That is one way of going about it. Maybe one test a week should be good enough for you, right? That's about it.
Sir, the next question that is on students' mind is that how do we balance the GS and CSAT preparation in this last leg of the preparation?
This is also one very common area of you can say doubts amongst aspirants. Those aspirants who have come very late to the party, they are the kind of aspirants, they may ask you a question like this, because some person who has prepared for CSAT also knows it does not take you more than an hour a day, right? To practice maybe around 5 to 10 odd questions a day, and that's about it, right? You don't really have to go all guns blazing and do 50, 60 questions a day. That's not what you have to do, right? You have to have at least weekly targets, daily targets, and on the basis of daily targets, expose yourself to 5 to 10 odd questions. That's about it. So try to solve them. If you cannot solve them, that's not a problem. Go for the explanation. If you can understand the explanation, good enough, right? That's all you have to really care in terms of CSAT, right? 1 hour a day. The rest you can allocate to your general studies per se, if you ask me, right? Now, in terms of 1 hour a day, right? Once again, basis your areas of strength, right? You should have weekly targets, daily targets, right? Try to prioritize those areas first where you're a little unsure, right? Do them first, do the areas of strength closer to the time of examination. But I would recommend 10 questions a day is a bare minimum that you can try, and it does not take you more than an hour's time every day. And at best, you can solve around 5 to 6 odd passages per day. That's good enough, right? It's not a lot, I would say.
So that was a very detailed description of how one should prepare and balance both GS as well as CSAT. So moving on, as we move closer to the exam, the anxiety is definitely going to grow much stronger. So as we move into the D-Day, any particular advice or any tips that you would like to share to our students that they should keep it in their mind?
Yes. See, I think fear and anxiety is one emotion that everybody encounters, right? Everybody needs to know that regardless of how smart you are, how well prepared you are, the outcomes are really not in your control, right? So even the smartest, they also fail at exams. Even the smartest also fail in their lives also. So it's a very natural thing. Everybody goes through it, right? In fact, so much so that John Maynard Keynes, who's very synonymous with economics per se, he did not perform up to his expectations in his favorite subjects, which were mathematics and economics, at the British Civil Service examination itself. So it can happen to the best of minds, right? So it's not only you, that's one. How do we alleviate ourselves of this fear and anxiety is $1 million question, right? Now, there are two choices. One is you can either choose the path of inaction or procrastination, or you can choose the path of courage. Now, for the first one, which is the path of procrastination primarily, which is the path of inaction, right? It helps you alleviate yourself of the fear or of the tragedy of failure momentarily, right? It's like you are delaying the inevitable. It's like you're hitting the snooze button on an alarm. This inevitable is going to happen. But because you have chosen inaction, that means what? That means you're not going to make yourself better, right? Because you choose to do nothing, you're not going to improve, right? Now, those people who are courageous at this point in time are not people who are less fearful. They are more courageous. What does that mean? It means that they're not naive. They're not entering into this foray mindlessly. Right? It's not like they do not know what their limitations are, or they do not know what the consequences of their actions are. Those people who are, you can say, very conscious, those people who understand themselves, their limitations so much better, right? These people will find that there is something within them that helps them proceed despite there being fearful odds. Now, that is something that also helps you respect yourself so much better. It does not tell you that, this exam is less difficult, or this exam is, you can say, less fearful. The exam may be as difficult or even more difficult than what you had imagined, but there is something in you that keeps you pushing, right? That is belief in yourself around this point in time, which is very, very important. A good case in point is Virat Kohli. Now, Virat Kohli, if you ask him, and in fact, he's mentioned it so many times in his interviews, that every time he goes out to bat, he tells himself there is no bowler in the world who can get him out, right? Has Virat Kohli never gotten out on ducks? He has gotten out on ducks more than Sachin Tendulkar. Right? So he has gotten, but he's arguably one of the best batsmen in his generation. Right? That self-belief helps you propel yourself. Facing your fears, deconstructing your fears. What is it that causes that anxiety? How are you going to, knowing fully well that there is something that can make you anxious, how are you still going to face it? That, I think the answer to that lies in belief, right? Have belief in yourself. Do things, because if you do things, the worst that can happen is you will not succeed. Maybe that is the only trigger that you're required to do better the next time, right? But chances are, if you have prepared so much and if you have faith in your work ethic and if you continue to do things, right, chances are you're going to land on the good side of fortune. And that's what I would say.
Very nicely put, sir. with the example of Virat Kohli. Sir, my last question to you would be that considering on the D-day of the exam, many students face this problem of fatigue after the GS exam, where they feel that they've not performed well and they end up not giving the CSAT exam or not focusing enough for the exam and doing their best for the CSAT. And eventually, then the story is unfortunate. Sir, what would you advise for them?
See, the advice is only tactical. You need to be very aware of the fact that the moment you come out of general studies, there will be, you can say, institutes, and there will be people who will push out answer keys. Most of those answer keys are error prone, right? And it's not the right time for you to be looking at the answer keys. Right. Typically, it's a very hot day in cities like Delhi, right? And in other cities also in the northern parts of India, possibly also in the south. Right? So you do not have to be too worried about what has happened in general studies 1. Maybe wait about 5 to 6 hours. Right? In these 2 hours, try to prioritize as to how you're going to go about CSAT. Remember this, in CSAT, the only thing you have to do is get 28 questions right and no question wrong, which is not impossible, although it's very unlikely. Right? So you need to have a certain set of priorities. You need to know what section are you going to attempt first. If you ask me, I typically ask people to attempt quantitative aptitude and logical reasoning first and then RCs, right? That is what I would recommend. Focus on getting these 28 questions right first and then worry about how much of an aggregate score you're going to get, right? Now that means what? That means first finding out those questions from your areas of strength, which is where self-assessment is very, very important. You need to only, you can say, try those questions where you are sure of the topics, right? So you try those questions first. Get them right, that gives you some sense of confidence. That confidence is very, very necessary for CSAT, for you to be attempting intermediate or even difficult questions, but work in a very time-bound manner. Why? Because there will be 28 odd passages, 26 to 28 odd passages that you'll have to read, and you'll have to get all those questions right also. RCs, typically you can expect an error rate of 5 to 6 odd questions, right, depending upon how well you're prepared for it. Right? So you cannot put all your eggs in one basket. Try to clear the cutoff in the first half itself. Right? Or if at all, if you are not very sure of your logical reasoning and quantitative aptitude skills, at least try to pick up, maybe around 25, 30 odd marks. Right? That should be good enough for you to clear this exam. Know that in every exam, regardless of how difficult that is, 28 questions, finding those 28 questions is very doable a task, right? So focus on that aspect first. Do not get too bogged down by how you performed in general studies. You are not very sure. Right? After you're done with CSAT, then only look back at those keys and find out how you're doing at GS1 and GS2. Right? In the meantime, try not to look at answer keys. This is easier said than done, I would say.
Sir, any final words of advice or motivation for the students as we end up this session?
I would continue to tell you the same thing. Right? Right now is not the time to drop off. Right now is the time to have belief in your work ethic. Right? Whatever you have done up until now, have faith in that thing and have, you can say, an absolute belief in yourself that preparation is going to sail you through. It's only belief at this point in time which is going to count, and this belief is also going to frame your temperament in the examination hall also. Right? Do not procrastinate right now. Have faith in yourself. You are going to clear it. Don't worry.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable insights and tips. I'm sure the students are going to benefit in this last lap of their preparation.
Thank you so much, Ranchan.
Students, I hope you found this session insightful, and I hope that these comprehensive tips and insights shared by sir will definitely help you in this last lap of your preparation. All the very best, stay positive, and best of luck for UPSC Prelims 2024.